Welcome to Auction version 4, the event management software tool from Auction Systems. This video is part 2 of the Financial Name Document series in the playlist for documents. In this video, I will show you the on-screen preview of one name record, show you how to refine the name selection criteria for a financial document, and how to design the look of the document. If you've not already watched part 1 of this series, please return to the playlist for documents and watch that video before continuing. This is the format and name selection screen. On the right is a preview of one name record, and it will be the record that is highlighted in this grid in the center. This preview will never be a preview of the financial documents for every name in the grid to the left of the preview. This preview to the right is simply there for me to see what a single invoice or other financial document might look like. To see a sample of the invoice for a different name record, click that name record in the grid and the preview on screen will refresh. Speaking of refreshing the preview on the right, these buttons along the bottom control that preview. When you don't want to see this on-screen preview, click On Demand and the preview will go away. When the After Idle For button is selected, you can set the timing for how fast the preview on screen will refresh. The default is every 2 seconds. I find this 2-second timing really annoying if I'm going to be making lots of changes because the screen will constantly blink on and off as the preview refreshes. So in making lots of changes, change this timing to maybe at least 60 seconds. Then, if it does not refresh immediately after the last change, click the Update Preview button and force the refresh. This button will also turn the preview back on if you had turned it off by clicking On Demand. And of course, the default timing button pops up a screen where you can change the default update timing to whatever timing you want. But remember, if you change this default setting in Program Settings, it will set the new default timing for every preview on any document or report formatting screen. So be sure to set it for a reasonable number of seconds, or others who open your project may not ever see a refresh and might not know to click Update Now to force a refresh. They will just think making changes doesn't do anything. On the left side of the formatting screen in the top panel is the name selection criteria. Because I chose invoices and for my starting format I chose needs printing, some name selection criteria is already filled in for me. For name types, bidders and participants has been selected as my name type because bidders and participants are the name records that have a bid number or have bought something. Since the document I selected was invoices, and invoices are all about purchases and payments, bidders and participants are my likely names. I can change the name type or add another name type by clicking the buttons. Dark buttons are selected, light buttons are not selected. To the right of the name types in the same section is the Refine area. Refinements allow you to drill down the broad list of names, in this case bidders and participants, to a subgroup of that list. If I want to print an invoice for every bidder and participant, I can click the X next to each refinement pull down so that there are no refinements. Currently, the top refinement is for purchases, and right now it's set to refine the list of bidders and participants to bidders and participants that do or don't have an item purchase and or do or don't have a ticket purchase. This refinement is useless as is because it does not limit the list at all. So what I have to do is uncheck some of the yellow buttons. If I only want to print invoices for bidders and participants who bought an item and or a ticket, I would uncheck the No Item Purchase and the No Ticket Purchase buttons so those buttons turn light. That would limit my list on the right to only people that bought something. If I'm not using Auction to track ticket sales, I can uncheck ticket purchases too. If your license does not include premium features and so you are not offering quick checkout, turn that refinement off too by clicking the X. One refinement I like to add for event night invoices is balance due from guest, and then I pick the non-zero button so I do not bother printing invoices for people who do not owe any money. There are so many other choices in the refinement pull downs for these documents that no matter what financial document you are printing, you will be able to refine your name selection to the specific group of names you want to print the document for. The next panel down is the header information panel. The one thing you cannot change in this panel is the name of the licensed organization. That's controlled by your actual license for the auction software. However, you can change the font size if you desire, and you can add a project image like your organization's logo to the top of the invoice or the top left or right of the organization's name. In order to add an image, it must be saved in Settings, Project Settings, Images. And you can add more text below the organization by typing in here. Perhaps you would like to have the address or phone number of your organization. Type it in, and once it's typed in, you can highlight any text you want to bold, underline, or italicize, and then click the appropriate button here. If you want to center the text or move it to the left or to the right, highlight the entire text and use these buttons to move it into position. The next panel down is for name information. These top buttons refer to how you want the guest name to appear in the upper left of the document underneath the header. If Name Company is selected, the name of the person or persons listed as primary and secondary will appear above the name of their company if there is a company name. Company name is the opposite. Company name will appear above the name of the person or persons in that name record. Preferred record listing only relates to the name entry panel in the name entry form. If you added a company name to that panel, you had to choose whether to list that record by company or by name. Whichever you picked will then be the preferred record listing. So if you said list by name and there is also a company name in the record, the company name will not appear in the document when you choose preferred record listing only. The next choice is to show the preferred record listing and then the other non-preferred listing underneath it. If you want to include any of the address or contact information underneath the name, you can do so by clicking it. Remember, dark is turned on and light is turned off. On the right side of the document, you have two pull-downs for other information such as bid number, table ID, or external ID. Both of these pull-downs have a blank spot on the top of the list. So if you only need bid number, use the top pull-down to select bid number, and in the lower pull-down, click on the blank space and nothing will appear underneath bid number on the right side of the invoice. The next panel is Customize Contents. The top of this panel only appears in the Contents panel for invoices. It is not in statements or donor receipts. Most organizations do not change the default purple button, and so all purchases and all payments will appear on the invoice. Some organizations require everyone to purchase and pay for their tickets in advance and don't care to include those on the invoice for checkout at the event. This is possible if certain conditions are met. The first is that when the ticket was purchased, the payment received was exactly the amount of the ticket, and if it was more than the ticket price, any other purchases were also entered in the buyer's record, so when the purchases and payments are done, at some point prior to the event night, that person had a zero balance. The purchases were completely paid for by the payment. Then, if you click this lower purple button on the invoice, at the event, the only purchases and payments on the invoice will be the purchases and payments entered after the guest's last zero balance. If the guest never has a zero balance, all their purchases and payments will be on their invoice. Next, we have the information about the purchases that will appear on the invoice. If you don't want the donor value or the value of the tickets to appear on the invoice, uncheck the yellow value button. If ticket purchases are included in your project, they will show on the invoice, unless you have the zero balance thing going that I just explained. Without changing any of these settings, the description for a ticket purchase includes the name of the ticket and the number of tickets of that type purchased. If a ticket type happens to include a retail item that the guest must pick up at item pickup, you can include that information by clicking the pink Ticket Details button. Only check this button if you need more than just the name and number of the ticket type to appear on the invoice. These blue buttons will allow you to include more details about the item purchases than simply the item number and description of the item. Usually you can leave these buttons light, but if you do have a reason for including any of this information about the item, click the appropriate blue button. The pink or reddish buttons are to include information about the donor of an item on the winning bidder's invoice. Usually this information is not necessary, but if you have a need to include any donor information, click the appropriate button to add that to the winning bidder's invoice too. When entering winning bids or ticket purchases or payments, you may have made some mistakes and had to void some transactions. The default is to not include any of those voided mistakes on the invoice. If you really want to show those mistakes, you can by clicking the Include Voids button here and/or here. And last, this shows the information about the payments that will be included on the invoice. The next panel is the payment block. This block is very helpful for the cashier at checkout on your event night, but if you don't need it, on the left just choose None. There is a default payment block, and you can change it up if you want by adding or deleting any text inside this text box. Finally, we have the footer. There is default that you can change by clicking Custom, or you don't have to have a footer at all by clicking None. There is also a pull-down on either side to add the project name or date below what's in this text box. Of course, there is also a blank spot on each one of these pull-downs to not show anything below the text box. Once you have the document how you like it and the name selection you desire, click the Save button on the ribbon, name it and save it, and it will be available under Custom Formats for the next time you need it. Thank you for joining us.